So this particular session is called Sick of Giving Feedback. Get your students to do it because feedback is hard. My name is Kayla Berg. I teach 7th grade at North Middle School, and I'm going into my 10th year of teaching, which is mind-boggling to me. I don't feel like I've been doing this long enough or that I know enough for that. I feel like especially this year, I feel like I'm back at my first year all over again. This is going to be my goal for this particular session is that the information I'm going to give you and the resources are going to be pretty brief, but then you're going to have a lot of time to maybe modify this for something that would work in your classroom, just because it's easy to go to a PD and think there's cool stuff and then never actually touch it again because you get overwhelmed with other things. So I want you to be able to have the time to do with this information whatever's going to work best for you and your students, whether it's online or in person. This particular mode of giving feedback would work either way. Oh no, there we go. That's my idea of giving feedback to all of my children. That's what I look like. So feedback allows students to see how they're doing and make changes as needed before getting a grade. So when you can give them that feedback of, particularly in writing, a lot of this for me is geared towards writing since I teach ELA. You know, you want to be able to help them grow as writers, and you want them to be able to, you know, make changes and make the edits and revise how they've worded things. But in order, looking at every single piece from every single student is really difficult, especially in like middle and high school where you might have 100 to 200 students. I think my roster right now is sitting right at just shy of 100. Well, if I'm like, kids are working and I'm trying to give feedback to 100 kids, it's exhausting. So the trick is to get them to do it themselves or for each other. But there's a couple of buts on this. For starters, partnering students is exhausting. Not all students are going to be successful when they're working together. You've got the kids who, well, I want to be with my friend. Well, they might get along with that student, but those two together aren't going to get any work done. Well, I can't work with this kid. And then you end up listening to them bicker all day and they don't actually get any kind of work done. So what I did when I did this past year was I gave them the illusion of choice. I made this peer review partners form. I'm going to share this slides at the end. Here we go. Where I told them, okay, we're going to do peer reviews. We're doing position papers. They're planners, so like their rough draft. Okay. And I told them I'm going to do my very best to pair you with someone of your choice, but this is not a guarantee. So I had them pick 5 classmates. It's just first names on here, so it's not a big deal. Oop, there's a couple of last names. 5 classmates they would most like to have as their partner. So this is their opportunity to pick, okay, here's the 5 people that I think I would like to work with. But then I also had them put, what 2 classmates would you prefer not to work with? So that's kind of letting me know, okay, who do you think you're going to be successful with? And then who do you think is not going to work for you? And so when they gave me that, I now had this form to look at to see, okay, who picked each other? Who can I pair up because they're both going to work well together? Versus who, you know, 2 students both put that they can't work with each other. Well, I'm definitely not going to pair up those 2. And, you know, it's not going to be a perfect system. When you get down to it, there's going to be people that don't get who they picked. But I made it my absolute goal to make sure that they didn't get paired with the person that they said they can't work with, which prevented a lot of the bickering. So they knew you weren't guaranteed anything. But I made sure none of my students had to partner with who they said they would prefer not to work with. I had a couple where, you know, their top 5 were gone, but you know your kids. And I knew, okay, you can work with this other kid and you'll be okay with this one that you didn't necessarily put in your top 5. And they were okay with that because it's this whole illusion of choice. You had this idea that you got to pick, and then Miss Berg got to put it all together to make it work for us. And that seemed to help them a lot with regards to feeling productive and feeling like I can work with this person, or this is going to be okay, or I trust this person to read my work is another important thing. Then the next thing, you have to practice what you want them to do over and over and over. So we did it with a lot of little things before they did their big peer review. So it would be just, okay, turn to your partner and you're going to review this quick thing. And so I had 2 forms that I gave to them, both in like physical copies and on Google Classroom when we did the peer review, to let them know, here's what you're looking for, here's how to do it. So I made a do's and don'ts. About here's things that you should do with your partner, here's things you should not do. And we went over this as a whole class multiple times, especially the last in the you should not with, say it's perfect, don't fix anything. Middle schoolers love to do that, and they think they're being so helpful and they're trying to be kind, like, oh, your writing is really good, you did a great job. But I had to explain to them, and we talked a lot about that's not helpful. You're not giving that person anything to work on or to look at or to fix. Even if they're fixing something small, we're not going to say it's perfect, don't fix anything. Can we get your slides to reference later? I got you. I'll put them on there. And then I gave them instructions. Okay, so here's what you're looking for. Because to tell students, like, okay, you're going to peer review each other's essays. Well, if you leave middle schoolers to their own devices and say, peer review these, they're going to be done in 5 seconds because they're, for the most part, they're not going to do it. They're going to look at each other's and say, you did a great job. I'm done. Ms. Berg, what do I do next? I'm finished. They're not finished. They haven't done anything. So I gave them these specific instructions where they had to look for these specific things and highlight it. And then the other bonus was that made it really easy for me to look back and see where a student struggled, where they did well, if their partner actually followed the directions. And then with, looking at revision history in Google or in Google Docs, I can see, did you make changes to the parts your partner highlighted? And so it let me see the whole process as the teacher, but it also gave them specific things to do as the peer review student. So they had to highlight all these things. And then they had to score. We had a rubric too, and you can change your rubric for what you're working on. This has just worked for the essay that we were using, where they had to give them a score. Okay, you're going to highlight the claim. Well, if the claim's not there, I don't have anything to highlight in yellow. That shows me that the score on that needs to be lower. And then I also gave them a different peer feedback form that I'm not saying necessarily use all of these things. These were just different pieces. I didn't use all of this at the same time. So we didn't do the do's and don'ts plus the highlighting plus this. Like, these were just separate forms that I used depending upon what worked. So in this one gave some nice sentence stems for them to work on with a typo. Awesome. So hey, instead of saying these things, here's what to say instead. And it gave them an option to, then they had to look through and find their partner's claim. They had to find their partner's reason. They had to find their evidence. And then that made it very clear, like, well, you only had 2 reasons. I couldn't find the third one. Well, now the person who's doing the review has very specific comments of, you need a third reason, you only had 2. The person whose paper is getting reviewed then has very specific feedback as to what they need to fix. Okay, I need to add a third reason in here. Or they can say, no, here's where I put the third reason. And so it kind of gives them a way to have that conversation in a more structured way. Because as much as middle schoolers like to talk, when you tell them what to talk about, they sometimes have a problem. And so then on the second part, I have yes or no questions. Was the claim clear? They get to pick yes or no. Yep, claim was clear. And then I had to explain. Here's why it was clear. It was clear because it was in the first paragraph. I could tell what it was. It wasn't clear because I couldn't find it. And then you have the option to ask questions about those different parts to whoever you're reviewing. And then I've got protocol on the bottom about how it is that they're going to do it. And it's just a matter of figuring out what's going to work for you and your students, because they will talk about everything you don't want them to, and nothing actually gets done. I think that's what scared me about peer feedback before I structured it this way, is that, okay, I'm going to pair these kids up and then they're not going to do anything, or they're not going to get anything out of that, or they're not going to actually talk to each other, or they're going to argue with each other. But if you go more of this route where you're giving them the illusion of choice to start with, then they think they have some kind of control. It's all about illusions. And then you give them the structure to have those conversations with each other. It makes it easier that the peer review process is actually productive. I'm sure this tab. So I'm gonna, when I put all of the, I'm gonna put the, the Google slide presentation into the chat in a minute here once I'm done. And so all of those different forms are linked to it. And I don't think I have it set up to force you to make a copy. So if you want to use those, go for it. But just make a copy and then change it to make it work for what it is that you're doing and your students, because it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. These, I don't even use the same ones for different types of papers. This one just happened to be argumentative that we were doing. So when you get to the part where the kids are doing it, you have them share their document with each other. So whatever it is that they're writing in, this means I did all of mine digitally because we were doing drafts, they were typing. So they had each partner had a Chromebook. They went into their document with their rough draft planner that they were using. They shared those with each other, and then they were able to see and highlight right directly in their partner's paper for all these different things. And then it's just a matter of watching them, helping the partners that are necessary. Okay, excuse me. It's the most I've had to talk out loud in a minute. Where, you hear some bickering and come over like, hey, what's going on here? Or, as you're monitoring, you realize, oh, hey, this student isn't actually as much done as they need to. When I got to this step, I had about 3/4 of my class that was ready to peer review. And so what I ended up doing is putting them kind of on the edges of the classroom with their partner. And then in the middle of my classroom, I made a circle where I could sit in the middle and see all of my kiddos that weren't finished. Like they had been dawdling and maybe not doing what they were supposed to and screwing around when it was writing time. And so now they had me over their shoulder while the rest of their peers were reviewing with each other. But for the most part, having that structure meant that I could kind of step back from the process and just let them do it. Like it's already in place. They have someone to work with. They know very specifically what it is they're talking about. With that, they then knew very specifically what they needed to go and fix when they were finished. And it became a very hands-off process for me, where I could then look at the end result and monitor as we went. And I got the opportunity to help those students who were struggling a little bit more, who were a little bit more distracted, we'll call it, because I didn't need to monitor everything that was going on with the peer reviewing, because they had it. They were under control. They knew exactly what they were supposed to do, which took a lot of pressure off of me. And it made me more available to the students that needed it. So I'm going to very quickly share my slides, which then should open up. It should be able to, oh my goodness. Oh, have access to all of the different documents that are also linked in there for you to use and modify and whatever you may need. So like I said this was going to be real short. Turns out it was real short, because it's less about peer feedback isn't a new concept. Giving feedback, pairing students up, having them work together is not new. This is not a novel idea. The big part to make it successful is giving them the structure. So I'm going to be here hanging out. If you have any questions that you can write in the chat box, I'd be happy to answer them. But for the most part, if you would like, now is your time to make your own forms, use the ones that I've used, structure it in a way that's going to make it meaningful for you and your students in your classroom with something that you're doing this year. Pick one thing that you think peer review would work for and try to come up with the structure to make that successful for your students. I'm going to stop recording now.